Okay, so this is the final session of the module, and in this session I'll be looking at operations improvement. So if we go to the key questions which I want you to think about throughout this session, it is what should be the improvement priorities for an organisation, and also how are those priorities established. What are the broad approaches for managing operations improvements? And here we're thinking about different ways of thinking about what the operations is achieving, and then how organisations can identify and then improve on those particular aspects of the operations. What techniques can be used specifically for improvement, and I'll touch on some. There's lots and lots of different ways in which organisations go about improving operations. And really I'm going to touch on a few and talk about them in the round. Okay, so as usual, the transformation model, got inputs, outputs, and really operations can be improved right through this model. So we can think about the inputs, what's coming into the organisation, or even within an organisation, within a micro operation, what are the inputs from earlier stages of the process, then within the process, and then in terms of outputs, what are we giving to our customers, what are our customers receiving. So really we're looking at everything in the round here. So in terms of this this model which Slack devised, we've looked at direction, the strategy of the organisation, the objectives of the organisation. We've looked at design of the process, design of products and services. We've looked at the nuts and bolts of operations management, which is delivery, and here we're thinking about capacity, inventory, forecasting, and planning and control generally. Sorry about that, I got interrupted by the postman. Okay, so where was I? Delivery. Yeah, so delivery is about capacity, inventory, forecasting, supply chains. It's really the nuts and bolts, as I said earlier, of operations management, the heart of operations management. What on a day-to-day basis operations management we're really concerned about, and it's about the relationship between planning and control. Okay, so that's what we talked about in delivery. Then we moved on to developing the operations, turning it into something better than it already is. Where are the problems, where are the difficulties in delivering and meeting customer demand, and what can organisations do to improve on what they're actually doing already. And last time I talked about quality management and talked about that bridging between delivery and development, and here we are now talking about, so that's quality management, and here we're now talking about more general improvement activities. Okay, and TQM is a kind of way of thinking. TQM really, and also I guess in some ways lean production and just in time, can often be seen as ways organisations seek to make radical improvements to their operations. So I've already covered those. I'll talk about other aspects in operations improvement in this session. Okay, so I talked about priorities. What's important to the organisation? Where's the focus need to be? The first thing to do is to judge performance, and we can only do that through measurement. Okay, so for operations management, there's a lot of data. Organisations set up their systems and processes such that data is channeled about performance, is channeled to operations managers, who are then able to monitor those data and intervene where they think is necessary. So how is operations going to be judged? Is it good, bad, or indifferent? Okay, so we need to measure performance and quantify action. Okay, and going back to that point, if you're measuring performance and quantifying action, what that really means is that you can measure how we're doing and then carry out some sort of intervention into the operation process, whatever that might be, in terms of quality, or in terms of inventory, or in terms of capacity, whatever change you make, and then measure performance again. And what you're doing is looking for some kind of improvement. in terms of whatever measurement you make. And in many respects, you can put a cost against that. What is it costing us in terms of poor quality, for example? And we can use, as I talked about last time, I talked about cost quality. You can put costs against things, costs against inventory, costs against queues in operations. So you can put a cost against all these things, and then you can carry out the improvements, carry out the intervention, measure the change in improvement, and put a cost against that. And you can put a cost against your intervention and work out a cost-benefit analysis. Okay, performance measurement enables organisations to exert control on an ongoing basis. So what it is a process of intervention and another intervention and another intervention, continuously looking to control and improve the operations. Okay, so one good way of thinking about this is the balanced scorecard. If you haven't heard of the balanced scorecard before, then take a look. It's a very useful way of thinking about organisations from more than just a financial perspective. Okay, so financial performance is one aspect of the balanced scorecard, and financial performance measures. So here we're looking to achieve strategic impact. How should we be viewed by our shareholders? If you're a public sector organisation, your shareholders are taxpayers. Okay, and taxpayers are normally voters. So that's one. The other one is customer performance measures. So this is another measure which will obviously impact on finances, but is in fact another way of thinking about what we do as an operation. So to achieve strategic impact here, what we're interested in is what our customers' perspectives are on the products and services they consume from us. You can look backwards to your process measurements. And here what we're trying to do is achieve strategic impact through thinking about aspects of performance that the business process should excel at. What should we be really good at in terms of our day-to-day processes? This particular measure is very, very commonplace, a very commonplace focus for operations managers. And then finally we have learning and growth, a future of the organisation. So here for strategic impact, we're looking to build our capabilities over time. Have we got capabilities in the various operational delivery aspects that we're seeking to excel at? And of course, these are all interlinked. So internal processes, impact on financial performance, customer performance measures, impact on finance performance, and learning and growth capabilities will improve our internal processes and our customer performance measures. Okay, so prioritising process objectives. So what we do is we look at the importance of each competitive objective. What are those again? Let's see if we can remember them. They are quality, speed, dependability, flexibility, and cost. Where's our important objective? Okay, what is our performance in each competitive objective? And based on the importance and our performance, we can look at we can determine our priorities. What are we going to focus on? Are we going to focus on quality, or are we going to focus on flexibility, or are we going to focus on something else? Okay, an important way of thinking about your performance objectives is to think about what is order-winning objectives, and these are providing crucial advantage with customers. What really is going to separate us from our competitors in our customers' eyes? Providing an important advantage with most customers, and providing a useful advantage with most customers. So these are the top performance objectives. So is our product or service subject to very high levels of elasticity of demand, in which case cost might be the crucial element? Or do our customers value quality over cost, in which case quality might be our key performance order-winning objective? Okay, so we've identified order-winning objectives. Then qualifying objectives. What gets us on the list for our customers? We need to be up to good industry standards, need to be around the median industry standard, or need to be within close range of the rest of the industry. And different objectives will be at different points against what our competitors are doing. Less important objectives are things which aren't usually important, but could become more so in the future, rarely rated as being important, or never come into consideration. So you see you've got a kind of hierarchy there. And what I've done here is structure these around order-winning objectives and qualifying objectives. Okay, it's a nice little model here of thinking about what's important to our customers and how we compare against our competitors. Okay, so across the x-axis down the bottom there, we have order winning at the stream end and less important objectives at the other end. And on the y-axis, some objectives are better than our competitors at the top, some would be worse than our competitors at the bottom, and some would be around the middle. Okay, anything below that line is a problem, and that's where we're focusing. Everything above is fine. Okay, we are better than our competitors, or at least as good as our competitors, in those objectives that count for our customers, and possibly below our competitors in terms of other objectives, but those aren't important to our customers, so we don't need to worry about those too much. We need to focus on the ones which are at the top end. Anything below that line we need to improve. Okay, and that line can shift up and down. You can alter that line depending on where you feel your objectives match against your customers' priorities. Anything down in that corner requires urgent action. These are crucial objectives where we aren't performing very well compared with our competitors. Anything up there, this is an interesting one. Anything up there in the corner, we're very good. That suggests we're very good at some objectives which aren't particularly important to our customers. Maybe we're spending too much effort there, too much attention there, and we could divert that attention to other areas where we have problems. Okay, now a lot of what I've talked about now, up to now, has been, and virtually the unspoken view is that the 5 key objectives and any sub-objectives within those are all intention, that you can't be good at everything, that if you focus on cost, then that will come at the expense of maybe quality. If you focus on dependability, that may come at the expense of flexibility. So these things are all intention and putting against each other. And that's where the polar models came into their own, to show that tension, to show that organisations might excel at one thing at the expense of another thing. Now, that is just one view. I've done some research with one of my PhD students, and this view seems to be supported, certainly in the research we've done in the car industry. But there are other views. So you can see the reference there in the corner. The Sanko model takes a rather different approach. It says that everything can be improved, and that these objectives are complementary to each other. So you start with quality, and then from quality you develop dependability. And through dependability, once you've got quality right, dependability right, then you can start to focus on speed. Once you've got quality, dependability and speed right, then you can start to think about flexibility. And then finally cost will come. Okay, so this is a alternative perspective and seems to make sense in some organisations. Some research seems to support this view. Other research supports the view I've kind of fed you up to now, which is that these objectives are intention. So there's different approaches. You can see why it's called the Sanko model. You build increasing layers like a cone or a mountain, building one layer upon another. Okay, so from a critical perspective, this might be important to some of you if you're trying to think about criticality in your assignment. From a critical perspective, maybe you want to think about, well, to what extent does this polar model, this model of these objectives being intention, to what extent does that make sense within the organisation you're looking at? Maybe something like this Sanko model, where these objectives are seen as complementary to each other makes more sense to you. If you're going to go for one or the other, then I would like to see you support your view with observation and with logic and with references. Okay, and this is Furdo's development of his model. You can see that what he's tried to do here with his colleague is think about, he's called it the fitter factory, think about how specifically you can interpret the different objectives. He's got 3 here. Interpret these different objectives and think about how over time making differences to, say, safety and housekeeping, process variability, tacit production know-how, responsiveness, and labour and machine efficiency, how with these things together we'll start to build that sand cone across the different objectives. So each of these is an interpretation of one or more of the objectives. Okay. I pose this question for you. What is punctuality? How do you define punctuality? What's good, what's bad? Here are some data. This data are Virgin Trains and it's punctuality. For Virgin Trains, punctuality is within 10 minutes. That's regarded as punctual. So 92% of trains run by Virgin Trains arrived within 10 minutes of when they're supposed to arrive. So that's regarded as punctual. And that's fine from a the transport in the UK perspective, that's fine. But in other societies, all trains are punctual. And 10 minutes late is 10 minutes late. 1 minute late is 1 minute late. 30 seconds late in Japan is 30 seconds late. And also, trains arriving early are a problem. Trains arrive on time, not early or late. And this gets us on to things like how we think about performance. So, here's the actual performance of a process measure. Let's say it's 83%. Is that good or bad? It might seem good, it might seem bad. Okay? It's all about context. If we look at this 83% measure compared with our performance over previous years, over the previous year, then it's excellent if our performance is 60%. However, if we look at our goals in terms of strategy, maybe we want to achieve 95%, then it's poor. Maybe our competitors are achieving 75%. In which case, our measure is good. In reality, absolute performance is 100%. And compared to that, it's poor. There's always room for improvement. Okay? So, the way of thinking... So, what I'm trying to get at here is that all measures carried out in all processes are relative. And it's relative to a number of different things. The context, the situation, what our customers expect, all those sort of things determine how we think about the measures within our organisation, within our operations. Okay? And from a theoretical perspective, what I'm saying here is that it's contingent. Okay? So what we do in terms of making improvements could be regarded as being contingent. So if you think back to a little bit of organisational theory and contingency theory, that's what's relevant here. So the next question I posed you was, what are the broad approaches for managing improvement? I talked a bit about benchmarking. Benchmarking is pretty much a commonplace way of thinking about setting where we are now and where we want to be. Different types of benchmarking organisations carry out. Internal benchmarking, comparing one factory against another factory, one service delivery point against another, one supermarket against another supermarket, one type of process against a different type of process within the organisation. So you can benchmark against all sorts of internally across organisations. You can do external benchmarking. looking at how processes within our organisation compare to those within other organisations. These benchmarks can be competitive or non-competitive. So we can look at competition internally between, say, one supermarket and another supermarket, or one factory and another factory, or we can look at competition externally between what our organisation is achieving and what a competitor organisation is achieving, or we can be non-competitive. That particularly happens internally, but we might compare ourselves against other processes and other organisations which aren't competitors to us. They might be in other industries, for example. We can look at performance in terms of outputs, or practices in terms of inputs. What I did in the lecture and what these data show is some research which was carried out in the International Motor Vehicle Programme, IMVP, which I was part of when I was some years ago working at the University of Bath. And initially, these data were collected for The Machine That Changed the World, which was a book which radically altered perspectives of production in the West based on the ideas of lean production. So it really brought the idea of lean production to the public and to people within industry generally. A best-selling book. And what we have here is early data. You can see that Japan had Japanese manufacturers of cars in Japan had fantastically good performance compared to manufacturers elsewhere. So we have Japan in North America, the US in North America, the US in Japan and Europe, as US manufacturers, European manufacturers in Europe, and other countries. A few years later, we've seen radical improvements by adopting lean production in many parts of the world. But the thing is, Japan is still ahead. Japanese manufacturers are still ahead in terms of productivity and continually improving. What these data illustrate is the power of benchmarking. What organisations were doing was looking at what was going on in Japan, what they were doing in their own factories, in their own processes, and then trying to find big improvements, very quick improvements, in this case in terms of inventory and quality, all sorts of different key objectives, and implement those improvements and look to see how they've improved, what's changed, and how do they compete how are they performing compared with their competitors. Some of the data coming out of the IMVP program, you can see differences between mass and lean production here. So organisations doing mass production compared with organisations doing lean production. I won't dwell on that, you can look at that in your own time. So, ways in which organisations go about managing improvement. So we talked about total quality management last time. It's putting quality and improvement at the heart of everything that is done by the operation, in an operation. So focuses on quality, a bit like the Sanko model, focuses on quality, and the aim is to build up on all the other objectives, using quality as the heart of that improvement initiative. Lean production, I talked about that when I was talking about when I was discussing inventory and flow. And here the approach is emphasising flow and synchronization of production and demand, and then identifying waste to optimize that flow. Six Sigma, another improvement initiative which is being widely adopted in many organizations, focused on improving product processes and transactions. And business process re-engineering, so radical approach to improvement that attempts to redesign operations around what customers need. So it's customer-focused perspective on operation. Now, a way of thinking about these different programs is to think about what we're trying to achieve in them. Okay, so in this little model, you can see the y-axis, we have at the top emphasis on rapid change, whereas at the bottom we have emphasis on gradual change. Some organisations want very rapid change. Some organisations will strategically think that they want to make improvements on a more gradual basis. on the x-axis, we've got on the left, emphasis on solutions, what do we want to do, and on the right, emphasis on methods, how are we going to achieve what we're trying to do. Lots and lots of different kind of techniques and tools there overlaid on that model. And what we can do is think about, so I've talked in the past, when I talked about lean production, I talked about total quality management, about how these kind of overlap and in some ways seem quite similar. Well, what we can start to do is think about the broad areas, the broad focus of these different initiatives. So total quality management, you can see, picks up on a lot of these things, a lot of these tools and techniques. It's more about how organisations do things, and it tends to be a gradual process. Lean production, still quite a gradual process. You do little bits at a time, but the emphasis is more on solutions, what we're trying to achieve. Six Sigma, a bit of a faster approach at trying to do things, but still very much focused on how organisations do things rather than the solutions. Business process re-engineering, it tends to be much more radical. It tends to be about breaking things down and rebuilding them. Looking at processes within the organisation and doing a very detailed analysis of that process, and then reintroducing totally new processes, and is more focused on solutions, what we're trying to achieve. So in terms of programs of change, what we have is quality improvement projects and programs are notoriously difficult to achieve and implement. Okay, lots of them fail. People within organisations get initiative fatigue, and senior directors and management within organisations seem to continuously try to introduce new programs of quality improvements, productivity improvements, all the time. This creates turmoil in organisations. Oh, we have another reorganisation going on. We have another change program going on. Another initiative going on. People get confused. People get nervous and anxious about these continual changes. People don't really like change. They like things to be the way they always are. So, why do it? Well, we want to improve processes, maybe. Or possibly even just simply survive. Because if we don't do it, you can certainly bet other organisations are doing it. And if other organisations are doing it, they're going to get a bigger share of customers. And if they get a bigger share of customers and bigger market share, they're going to win and we're going to go out of business. And I mentioned the Red Queen hypothesis, where if you've ever read Alice Through the Looking Glass, then you'll come across the Red Queen chapter where Alice and the Queen are running ever faster and getting nowhere. And this is what organisations seem to be doing, going faster and faster and faster, simply to stand still. Levine talked about improvements, step changes. You unfreeze the process, make some change, refreeze the process, see how it beds in. Unfreeze the process, make the change, refreeze the process, see how it beds in. This is the kind of standard approach for organisations. They can be big breakthroughs, big improvements, or they can be small breakthroughs and small improvements. Either way, this is the kind of plan. So the idea is that performance is steadily improving with each change initiative, with each program, with each development. We have improvements in the performance of whatever objective we're interested in over time. The reality tends to be somewhat different. Sometimes things can even go backwards, and certainly we rarely achieve the planned improvements we hope for. So, as I said there, it doesn't always deliver hope for improvements. Deming is a guru in operations management, particularly in quality management. If you ever get a chance, look up on YouTube some of Deming's videos. He produced these little programs many years ago actually, but they're fantastic at showing you how to think about quality within organisations. So his focus is on quality, and he said you can't manage what you don't measure. For Deming, and actually for operations management generally, if you're not measuring it, you don't know what your performance is. And if you don't know what your performance is, you won't know whether you're good, bad or indifferent. And if you don't know that, you can't manage it. Here's 2 improvement cycles. This is the classic Deming cycle: plan, do, check, act. Plan what you want to do, change, do it, check whether the improvements have achieved what you want them to achieve, and then act to resolve any problems there might be. Then plan the next thing, do it, check, act, and so on and so forth. It's a continuous cycle. And this cycle has been adopted widely in different forms. This is another one, similar, the DMAIC model. Define what you're trying to achieve, measure it, analyze it, improve it, control the improvement, in other words, refreeze, define what you want to do next, and so forth. There's lots of these different kinds of models, these cycles, and they all seem to work in pretty much the same way. It's a continuous process, like a wheel going round and around, taking us through improvement upon improvement. And here is an example of how that's supposed to work. So we can see is little step changes going on, and the plan, do, act, check, act cycle, PDCA, Deming cycle sometimes called, taking us on and on through improvement after improvement. And what we hope to see is gradual improvement in performance across any of many objectives over time. Going back to the DMAIC cycle, we have define, what's the problem? Define requirements and set the goal. Measure, gather data, refine the problem and measure inputs and outputs. Analyze the problem, develop hypotheses, identify root causes and validate the hypotheses. Improve, develop improvement ideas, test, establish solutions and measure results. And control, establish performance standards and deal with any problems. This is an incredibly useful way of thinking in general terms about how we're going to go about our improvement initiatives. Six Sigma. This is pretty widely implemented now. It's very commonplace. It was devised by Motorola in the 90s as a concept of variation. So classically in things like statistical process control, which I talked about in the quality session, we would look at standard deviation around a mean performance and say that anything at plus or minus 3 standard deviations from the mean is a problem. That's where we set our control limits. So go back to the quality management session if you want to remind yourself of that. And there we are, there we go. So we've got 3 standard deviations around the mean. Now, if you have 1 million production opportunities, you make, say, 1 million bolts or 1 million things, or even you have 1 million service opportunities. An organisation will have that. Then, if you have 6 Sigma as your process variation, you'll have 66,800 defects in those 1 million opportunities. Now, that's quite small, but in proportional terms, but each one of those is a quality failure. 6 Sigma tries to say, right, okay, we have 6 standard deviations. This reduces for 1 million opportunities the defects per 1 million opportunities to 3.4. In other words, we're virtually wiping out failure in the production process. And with 6 Sigma come a whole load of different techniques and tools which are implemented. Finally, I'm going to talk a bit about business process reengineering. Here, what we're doing is focusing on the customer. So we think about functions in the process, function 1, 2, 3, 4, and end-to-end processes carried out through those functions which deliver products and services to our customer. At the front end, we have customer needs. At the back end, customer needs are fulfilled. And these are fulfilled through business processes. Where the functions meet the end-to-end processes, that's where we have some sort of activity occurring. To think about it another way, let's think about a real example. We have, in this particular example, I think this is a video production organisation. We have engineering, props manufacturing, marketing, sales, production, and finance and costing. Various different functions within the organisation which are interrelated somehow. And so in this organisation, a number of things are carried out. Quotations are delivered to customers. Programs are produced. Promotional and advertising contracts are carried out. Technical support contracts are carried out. Videos are produced. And across each of these processes, different functions will have different levels of input, and that's what's shown here. So you can see that in some activities, some functions have very small levels of input. In other activities, they have a large level of input. And it's where the large levels of input are occurring within these processes that we can enable us to focus our attention. So preparing quotations, in this particular example, the organisation established that engineering and finance and costing have major roles in quotation preparation. If there's a failure, some mistake made or some problem occurs, then this will create problems for the customer in terms of customer needs being fulfilled. So that's where we focus our attention. Similarly with music videos, for example, production is particularly important, and maybe to a lesser extent set and props manufacturing. Here, those are for that particular business process. Here we have a different kind of attention on production and sets and props manufacturing. Okay, so this is how business process re-engineering works, and then you can do a very detailed level of analysis within each of those different activities, those micro operations. Okay, so what techniques can be used for improvement? Some common techniques. Simple input-output analysis. What are inputs? What are outputs? What's the process? And we can use process mapping to think about this. Flowcharts, a more detailed way of thinking about specific processes. Scatter diagrams. Cause and effect diagrams, very, very commonplace. Pareto diagrams. This is something I haven't really talked about much in the module, but is a very commonplace actually in operations management. The 80-20 rule is sometimes called. The view that 80% of the value is actually found in only about 20% of the activities and value-adding activities that are carried out by an organisation, and that in the remaining 80% of activities, there's only probably about 20% of value-adding performance from the organisation. So really, the key for lots of organisations is to identify those. It's a rule of thumb. It's not exact normally, but those roughly 20% of activities that deliver roughly, broadly speaking, 80% of the value for customers. And YY analysis, 5 Ys it's sometimes called. Another guru from operations management, Ishikawa, really developed the idea of lean production, or often associated with lean production. As with many other things, there is a surprising amount of prejudice against quality control, but the proof of the pudding is still in the eating. What he meant by that is that quality control is a starting point for lots of organisations. Okay, this is a classic cause-effect diagram, sometimes called, after Ishikawa, who came up with it, an Ishikawa diagram. It's a way of thinking about where things are going wrong. And here, typically, you'd have a number of different categories, and against each of those categories, you would have a number of possibilities of problems which you can identify through analysis. In this particular example, which I've taken from a bit of research which I carried out, we were looking at delayed flights. And here we looked at the main categories, which were procedures, personnel, equipment, material, customers, and information. And against each of these, we looked at the key things from an analysis which came up against each of those, and the ones in bold are the ones which were regarded as being particularly important in terms of creating delayed flights, which obviously is a problem. And you can see that often it's associated with weather or air traffic control. Actually, these were just other factors. You can see there's a lot of factors there which were within the control of the organisation. Shingo talked about why analysis. I've used this extensively in research I've done in the past. And for Shingo, what he was saying was if you employ a relentless barrage of whys, this will start to tear away at the symptoms and get to the heart of the problems. That's an example of why analysis. And then what you do is you build up more and more problems, and then these start to be reduced down to some core underlying problems. I've talked about initiative fatigue, about continual change within organisations. When you guys go into work, I'm sure that most of you will either be involved in carrying out changes in organisations or subject to change within your organisation, probably both. And often people within organisations, senior management, directors in organisations, what are they trying to do? They panic about what their competitors are doing, and so jump at something which they think might change the fortunes of their organisation without really thinking through what they're trying to achieve and how they're trying to achieve it. Also, beware of IT fixes. It's tempting for lots of organisations to say, right, okay, our problems can be resolved by some sort of computerized system. Lean production is a good example of where computerization is not the solution. This may be part of the solution, may be a way of achieving your solution, but the solution is actually in doing very simple things. Okay, lots of organisations have awards and for achieving operational improvement. Okay, so let's think about those questions we had right at the beginning. What should be the operational improvement priorities for our organisation, and how do we determine those? Hopefully you've got some idea of how to answer that. What are the broad approaches of managing operations improvement? How can we go about it? What techniques can be used?